awakening before the mirror of the Scripture. Imagine for a moment that those ancient pages are no longer dusty relics for scholars, but a living map guiding you back to the deepest part of yourself. Imagine that every story, every line, every metaphor is a quiet mirror reflecting what has always been within you, waiting to be seen. The world outside is loud and hurried, yet there is a timeless truth unfolding within you, not to be debated but to be lived. Between the vast sky and the still room of the mind appears a bridge, not made of stone, but of light and ancient wisdom, inviting you to cross. There are words not meant to be heard, but to be felt, resonating in the clearest part of you, not to inform, but to transform. Ethan lived in a city far from the sea, working in an office filled with screens and reports. In the late afternoons, he often sat with an old Bible his mother had given him. He used to read it as history, as data, as a temporary comfort, but then he began to change his way of seeing. He no longer treated the book as a door leading outward, but as a mirror turning inward. When Ethan read about light and darkness, he no longer thought of distant scenes. He saw light as clarity, as a pure vision, as the awakening of wisdom, and darkness as confusion, as the state of being apart from his higher nature. When he read about seeds and soil, he saw the image of thoughts falling into the subconscious, the surface of the story being just the shell, while life itself lay within, waiting to sprout when watered by attention and stillness. One morning, Ethan decided to shift his old habit. He closed his eyes, took 3 deep breaths, and set a clear intention. Today I will read as one who lives, not as one who remembers. In that instant, a familiar passage began to glow. The words had not changed, but the reader had. The surface and the depth exchanged places. He felt as if he had gently drawn back a curtain to find the light that had always been there, not forcing, only waiting to be seen. Ethan carried that passage into daily life. In a tense email exchange, instead of reacting, he paused, saw the fear of losing control rising within, then chose the principle of silent order. His response became brief, clear, and calm. The conversation softened. He understood that it was not a miracle, but an inner alignment. From that day, Ethan used the book as a compass, each symbol as a signpost. He walked through the park at night, watching the water flow under the bridge, recalling verses about streams and the mind. He smiled, realizing that the lesson was never far away. It lived in every detail. When you read with the eyes of the heart, every scene becomes a verse, every step a line. And then the great question changes its place, no longer what have I read, but what truth is reading me. Shifting from knowledge to enlightenment, one late afternoon, Ethan sat by the window watching the violet clouds stretch across the horizon. He realized he had read hundreds of pages, joined many discussions, yet there remained an unnamed emptiness inside. He saw that knowledge could fill the mind, but enlightenment must open from the heart. When he read, his mind used to search for proof, for explanations, but now he practiced pausing between thoughts, where every word became silent. In that stillness, something new began to appear, like a curtain gently drawn aside, no more noise of reasoning, only a soft light spreading. Ethan realized that understanding is not accumulation, but release. Each layer of assumption that fell away made the light clearer. At times he felt lost, for he no longer had the comfort of familiar concepts to hold on to. Yet in that very uncertainty, a new clarity awakened. He stopped asking, what does this passage mean, and began asking, what is this passage revealing within me? From an observer, he became a participant. And strangely, when he stopped trying to grasp, the hidden meanings appeared on their own. He began to see that simple phrases like, be still and know that I am God, were not distant teachings, but living calls echoing through his own breath. Ethan remembered what his old teacher once said, reading a passage of the Scripture is like looking into a lake. The more you stir it, the murkier it becomes. The more still you are, the clearer it gets. He practiced this, reading slowly each morning, not to analyze, but to notice where the words touched his heart. Some mornings a phrase about light would warm his chest, and he understood it as a sign of resonance. The book was not giving him new knowledge. It was reminding him of what had always been there. One evening, he met his old friend Grace, who was struggling after losing her job. She asked how he managed to stay calm. He did not explain. He simply said, Stop searching for answers out there. Listen to what the story inside you is trying to say. Grace smiled faintly, yet a spark of hope appeared in her eyes. Ethan realized he had crossed into another realm, from speaking about truth to living in it. When you shift from knowledge to enlightenment, you stop reading with your eyes and start reading with your soul. You no longer ask, what do I understand? But who am I becoming? It is the moment when the outer and inner worlds merge into one. The scripture becomes a mirror, no longer separating reader from text, student from teacher. And within that unity, understanding becomes as light as breath. Ethan closed the book and listened to his heartbeat, feeling as if someone was reading along with him, not a distant deity, but the most lucid part of himself whispering, "You are ready." He knew that from now on the path would no longer be about gathering knowledge, but about practicing presence through each breath, each word, each choice. Have you ever sat in the stillness of the night and felt a familiar phrase suddenly come alive, as if someone were calling you from within? If you have, that is the voice of awakening, softly knocking at your door. Thank you for listening. Light and darkness, as the codes of the mind. One early morning, Ethan stopped by the riverside and saw the water divided into two clear halves, one reflecting the radiant sunrise, the other still resting in the shade of an old tree. The image reminded him of the passages about light and darkness in the scripture. He once thought they symbolized good and evil, but that morning he realized they were the psychological map of the human being. Light is clarity, the awareness that we belong to truth. Darkness is confusion, the fear that makes us forget our inner wisdom. When the mind is filled with judgment and comparison, the darkness thickens. When the mind returns to silence and understanding, light expands. Ethan began to observe himself throughout the day. Every time he grew irritated, impatient, or afraid, he felt darkness descend, blurring his perception. But whenever he stopped, took a deep breath, and remembered the phrase, "Let there be light," a quiet stillness returned. Nothing outside had changed, yet the light within him made the world look different. He realized that light is not something to find, but something to switch on. Every loving thought is a small switch. Every word of forgiveness is a spark. One evening he spoke with Grace, his old friend. She told him she was struggling between anger and the wish to let go. Ethan said, "Between darkness and light, the choice is not to fight, but to turn on the lamp." She asked, "How do I do that?" He replied, "Through awareness. When you see yourself in darkness, you have already touched the light." Grace stayed silent, then smiled softly as tears rolled down. The light of awareness was small but steady, enough for her to begin again. From then on, Ethan understood that every metaphor of light in the scripture carries a practical meaning. To light a lamp and place it on the stand means to let your awareness guide your actions, not to hide it beneath old habits. Darkness cannot overcome light means that when you see your fear, fear no longer controls you. He also saw that each person is a lamp, and the world shines only when we each awaken our own flame. Another time, during meditation, Ethan imagined a room within himself, half bright, half dark. He slowly walked into the darker side, without avoiding it. There he found memories he had long hidden, words that hurt, failures, regrets. He did not push them away. He simply placed his hand on his chest and whispered, "I see you." Strangely, the darkness began to dissolve, not through effort, but through a kind gaze. He understood that forgiveness is not only for others, but also for the forgotten parts within. Light and darkness are not enemies, but the rhythm of the soul. One reminds you to be humble, the other to be strong. Both exist, so you can remember that you have the power to choose. When Ethan looked back on his life, he saw that every challenge had been an invitation to look deeper, and every time he chose awareness over reaction, the light won once more. Now he carries in his heart a quiet reminder: become the keeper of your own lamp. Whenever life feels dim, remember, the light has never gone out, you have only forgotten to turn toward it. If you are hearing this story, close your eyes for a moment and ask yourself, where is the light within me? Am I hiding it? If you feel ready, say, "I am ready to change." or simply type the number 1 to say that you have lit the small lamp inside your heart, the seed of thought and the field of the subconscious. One quiet morning, Ethan went to the park with a small notebook in his hand. He sat on a stone bench watching a gardener sow seeds into fresh soil. The scene reminded him of the verse, "The seed must fall to the ground before it bears fruit." In that moment he understood that every thought is also a seed, and the mind is the field. Each day we plant countless seeds, seeds of fear, seeds of gratitude, seeds of hope, seeds of blame. The soil does not choose, it nourishes all, but the harvest will differ depending on which seeds we water. In the past, Ethan had left his mind like an untended field. He planted thoughts of worry and then wondered why his life was filled with tension. Now he began to observe each stream of thought. When a negative idea appeared, he did not resist it. He simply smiled and replaced it with a gentle affirmation, "I am learning to choose good seeds." He realized that patience was essential. No one plants today and harvests tomorrow. Transformation in the mind requires the same quiet time as a seed sprouting underground. At noon, during his break, Ethan opened his notebook and wrote down 3 thoughts he wished to plant: peace, trust, and gratitude. He called them his 3 main seeds. Every morning he reread them like a gardener, checking his soil. When anger came, he paused, breathed, and asked, "Which seed am I watering?" If it was fear, he shifted his focus to the breath, letting the soil rest. Gradually, he noticed that the calmer his mind became, the stronger the seeds grew. There were days he felt tired and thought he had failed. But then he remembered, the farmer does not dig up the seed each day to check its growth. He only trusts and tends. Ethan began to trust the process. The silence between 2 thoughts was gentle rain. Perseverance was the morning Sunday. Slowly the soil within him softened, no longer hardened by doubt. He also saw that some old seeds needed to be removed, those negative memories and self-limiting words. He did not blame them, he simply knew that a new season requires renewed soil. Whenever a painful memory surfaced, he wrote it down and crossed it gently, saying, "Thank you for the lesson." It was a small ritual, yet it helped him release with grace. One rainy afternoon, he sat by the window watching the drops fall and thought of the line, "Sow and you shall reap." He realized it was not a warning, but a gentle law. Sow loving thoughts and you will reap kind actions. Sow appreciation and you will harvest joy. He began to see everyone as gardeners, some planting hope, others planting fear, and the world, through that lens, became a vast field of minds learning how to sow rightly. As night fell, Ethan closed his eyes, placed a hand on his heart, and whispered, "Tomorrow I will sow again." He knew the seeds did not need to be many, only true. One small seed of gratitude could bloom into a forest of peace. If you are hearing this, pause for a moment. Today, what seeds are you planting in your mind? Write down one seed you wish to plant anew, perhaps peace, courage, or forgiveness, and hold it as a promise to yourself. The principle of instant success in everyday life. Ethan once thought that success was the result of luck or extreme effort, but after days of reading and contemplation, he realized that true success is the natural effect of inner alignment. The world does not change first. Rather, when the mind harmonizes with the principle of truth, everything outside finds its rightful place. One morning he stepped out of his house with a simple practice, to choose one spiritual principle and apply it throughout an ordinary day. That day he chose silent order. On the way to work, he got stuck in traffic, horns blaring, people rushing. The old part of him wanted to complain, but he remembered, it is not circumstances that create tension, but how we respond to them. He closed his eyes briefly, took a deep breath, and imagined a calm light within him like a still lake. When he opened his eyes, nothing around had changed, yet his mind had. The cars were still crowded, the people still hurried, but inside was quiet. When the light turned green, he moved slowly and let another car pass. A small act, yet he felt he had moved in order rather than chaos. The first success was victory over himself. At the office, he practiced again. A colleague sent him an email criticizing his report. Normally, he would have defended himself, but that day he paused and reread the message with a new perspective. Every event is an opportunity to apply a principle, he reminded himself. He revised his report, not out of fear of judgment, but because he wanted it to reflect the clarity within. During the meeting, he spoke briefly and clearly, without a defensive tone. The room remained calm, and his colleague looked at him differently. Ethan realized that inner order spreads quietly into the outer atmosphere. Later that afternoon, he sat at a small cafe and wrote in his notebook, "When we stop reacting, the world responds differently." He called it the principle of instant success, not waiting for a big opportunity, but simply placing the mind in its right position so that every action bears fruit naturally. He understood that every spiritual principle is a law, not demanding blind faith, but consistent practice, like gravity that works whether you notice it or not. He recalled Emmet Fox's words, "No one can live in peace while thinking in confusion." When order is restored in the mind, success becomes a natural reflex. The next week, Ethan practiced the principle of peace. When meetings grew tense, he listened instead of interrupting. He sought not to win by words, but by clarity. And strangely, whenever he held his calm, the outcome turned beneficial for everyone. No one saw a miracle, yet everyone felt the quiet shift in the air. One evening, Grace came to see him, still anxious about finding a job. Ethan shared his lesson. Success is not getting what you want, but maintaining the right frequency for it to come. When you are centered, every door opens naturally. Grace looked at him, half doubtful, half curious. Ethan smiled. "Try spending one day without arguing with reality and see what changes." A week later, she called, sounding lighter. She said that simply by changing her attitude, people responded more kindly and new work came more easily. Ethan realized that the principle of success lies not in technique, but in awareness. When you adjust the inner state, the outer results align on their own. Whenever he was about to lose patience, he asked, "Am I creating waves or keeping the water still?" That simple question became his compass. He applied it to everything, replying to emails, catching a bus, speaking with his parents. Every act became a chance to practice. Once, a project at work went wrong and data was lost. Everyone panicked. Ethan, too, was startled, but instead of blaming, he focused on finding a solution. He gathered the team and said, "Let us stay calm. Only in order can we see the way." Gradually, the data was recovered. A colleague whispered, "You were strangely calm. It helped all of us." Ethan smiled, knowing the credit belonged not to him, but to the principle he was living. Over time, he saw that every area of life, work, health, relationships, follows the same law. Whatever begins with inner clarity ends with outer success. He called it instant success, not because it happens immediately, but because it begins the moment the mind shifts direction. Time is only the natural unfolding of that alignment. As night fell, he wrote his final line of the day. "There is no failure, only lessons in where we have yet to align." He closed his eyes and whispered, "Let there be light in this thought." And he knew success had already begun in that very moment. If you are hearing this, think of one small thing causing you stress today. Pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, can I bring this into alignment from within? When you shift your inner position, the world shifts its stance. And if these words resonate with you, leave the number 1 as a sign that you choose to live in the silent order of the mind. Decoding the symbolic language of the scripture. One misty morning, Ethan brought his Bible to the lake where the surface was so still it could mirror the sky. He opened a random page and read, "The sower went out to sow." In the past, he saw it as just a rural story, but today something deeper stirred within him. He wondered, if this were a code, what truth is hidden here? The moment he asked, a gentle understanding rose inside. The seed is thought, the soil is the subconscious, the sower is the will. The story was not about someone else, it was about him. From that day, Ethan began to read the scripture as if it were a map of sacred language. He realized that the language of holy texts is not written for logic, but for a mind ready to awaken. Images like water, fire, seed, vine, bread and wine Light and darkness are not just stories, but living symbols carrying energy. When he came across the line, the lamp is not placed under a bowl, but on a stand, he understood it as a teaching about awareness. The light of consciousness must be placed first, or the darkness of habit will hide it. He began to test this in daily life. Whenever he heard a story, he no longer stopped at the surface, but asked, "What law of the mind is this pointing to?" When people complained, he saw they were retelling the dark chapter of their own scripture. When he forgave, he realized he was living the line, "Love your enemies." Every action, when read rightly, was a passage of the scripture reenacted in a new form. One day, Grace came holding a verse that said, "The Red Sea parted and the Israelites passed through." She laughed. "How could that really happen?" Ethan replied, "Maybe not in a historical sense. The Red Sea is the sea of the mind. When we let go of fear, the waters divide and the dry path appears in between." Grace pondered for a while, then nodded, so the miracle is not breaking the law, but working with it at a higher level. She smiled softly as she said it. Ethan came to understand that every symbol has two layers, the shell and the soul. The shell is the word, the soul is the living spirit behind it. The one who is asleep reads the shell, the one who is awakening hears the soul, and to hear one must be still. He practiced reading like meditation, holding each word until its meaning unfolded like a flower. One evening, as he read, "Let there be light," he suddenly wept, not because he understood something new, but because the words spoke directly to him. The verse was no longer language, it became vibration. He realized that symbolic language is a kind of protection. It keeps truth safe from misuse by those not yet ready. Like a seed wrapped in a shell, when the student ripens, the shell opens on its own. That is why the same verse reveals two worlds, one for memory and one for insight. The reader with intellect sees history. The reader with intuition sees the self. The scripture does not hide truth. It simply speaks in a tongue that must be decoded by an awakened mind. Ethan wrote in his notebook, "There is no secret code to conceal, only eyes not yet clear enough to see." The sentence became his new compass. Each day he chose one symbol to reflect on: water as emotion, fire as spirit, bread as truth to be digested, wine as the joy of awareness. Beside them he wrote, "Let the water be still, the fire bright, the bread shared, the wine overflow." The more he wrote, the more he felt each metaphor was a practice for living. One evening, while sharing this insight with his friends, someone asked, "If everything is symbolic, then what is real?" Ethan replied, "The one who reads is real, the symbols are mirrors of being." The group fell silent. He added, "Like light through a prism, each symbol is a color, but the source light is one." They understood then that the goal is not to collect meanings, but to recognize the light behind them all. Ethan remembered the first time he read, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." Once he thought it was a declaration. Now he saw it as an invitation. Each person can live as an expression of truth when seen with the inner eye. From then on, whenever facing challenges, he asked, "What symbol is speaking to me?" If it was hardship, perhaps it was the desert where faith is forged. If it was opportunity, it was manna, the bread from heaven symbolizing new ideas. The more he read, the more he saw that the scripture does not merely hold the stories of ancient people, but the spiritual journal of humanity. When he suffered, he was living the chapter of Job. When he forgave, he was rewriting resurrection. When he shared faith, he was sowing seeds like the sower in the parable. One night he closed the book and wrote, "Symbolic language does not make people believe. It helps them remember. Remember that truth is not outside the words, but in the awareness reading them." He looked out over the lake and saw the moon broken into ripples on the water. Suddenly he understood. The lake is the mind, the moon is truth, and every ripple is interpretation. When the water is still, the moon appears whole. If you are hearing this, remember that all ancient teachings speak the same message in countless forms. You are the place where truth wants to be seen. Do not read with memory, read with life. And if today a single image from the scripture touches you deeply, do not ask why. Simply smile, for that is the moment the code is opened. Polishing the lens of the mind, in every spiritual journey, there is no tool, more important than the mind. It is both the lens and the projector, receiving images and casting them back onto the world. Ethan understood this more deeply when he reread the line, "When your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light." He once thought it spoke about morality, but now he saw it spoke about perception. The eye here is awareness. When the lens of perception is clean, life appears bright. When that lens is clouded, the world looks distorted. To change the scenery of life, one must first clean the lens of the mind. Each morning, Ethan began his practice of polishing this lens. He sat still for 5 minutes, reading nothing, listening to nothing, simply observing the stream of thoughts. At first, everything was chaotic, like a swarm of bees, plans, worries, memories, judgments. He only noticed them without attachment. After a while, the mind began to settle. In that stillness, he realized that every thought came and went, yet awareness remained untouched. He saw that this awareness was the true observer, the clear part untouched by movement. To polish the lens meant to return to that observer and wipe away the dust of old habits that obscured it. One day at the office, when co-workers were complaining about a client, irritation rose in him. He almost joined in but caught himself, recognizing this as a moment to train the mind. He stepped back and watched his emotions like a scientist watching a reaction. Within seconds, the negative energy softened. He smiled inwardly, realizing that polishing the lens requires no brush, only the light of awareness. The more aware he was, the faster the darkness dissolved. That evening he wrote in his notebook, "Today I saw clearly that emotions are not me. They are clouds passing through the sky." He thanked the irritation for giving him a chance to train the lens. Clarity, he noted, does not come from removing emotions, but from seeing through them. Emotions, when seen with compassion, melt like mist in sunlight. He also realized there are 3 kinds of dust that must be cleaned off: judgment, comparison, and fear. Judgment bends the lens. Comparison fogs it. Fear cracks it. Each time he noticed one of these layers, he placed a hand on his chest and whispered, "I choose to see with light, not with bias." The words felt like medicine. Over time, situations that once triggered strong reactions became gentle ripples instead. One weekend, Ethan spoke to a group of new students. He asked, "When you see something wrong, what kind of lens are you using?" Someone replied, "The lens of judgment." Ethan smiled. "Try the lens of compassion. You will see a different picture." They laughed. But when they practiced, everyone felt the shift. One student said, "It is strange, but when I changed the way I looked, the person I was angry with suddenly became easier to understand." Ethan knew that was the simple miracle of a clear mind. Polishing the lens of the mind is not something done once. It is a lifelong habit. Each day we encounter thousands of images, thoughts, and words. Without awareness, the lens is soon covered by dust from information and noise. So Ethan created his 2-minute rule. Before reacting to anything, he would pause for 2 minutes to see which lens he was using. Those 2 minutes became a doorway between unconsciousness and awareness. Some days he failed. A heated argument once made him speak harshly. Later, when calm returned, he did not blame himself. He simply wrote, "The lens needs more cleaning." He learned that patience is the finest polish. No lens stays perfect forever, only the craftsman who keeps refining it. He also noticed that the clearer his lens became, the more clearly he saw others. Instead of viewing them through memory, he saw them as they were. Compassion became natural. He realized that the light of awareness not only illuminates oneself, but also radiates outward. Others could feel the calm without knowing why. A colleague once told him, "I don't know why, but sitting near you feels easier." Ethan smiled. "Maybe because I am practicing to see through a clear lens." Grace, his old friend, once asked, "If someone keeps hurting me, should I still look with light?" Ethan replied, "Light does not mean tolerance. It means seeing clearly enough to act with wisdom rather than reaction. When your lens is clear, you will know when to speak and when to stay silent." Grace was quiet for a long time, then said, "Perhaps my own lens needs more cleaning than I thought." As the sunset filled his window, Ethan watched the golden light reflect in his eyes. He knew that the lens of the mind is the only bridge between the inner and outer worlds. If we want to see a clear life, we must begin by clearing the mind. He closed his notebook and wrote, "There is no bad world, only a view covered in dust." If you are hearing this story, ask yourself, through what lens are you seeing life today? Through fear or through gratitude? Through old memory or fresh perception? Leave a short note. I am ready to change, as your promise to wipe clean the lens of your mind. Each time you return to that clarity, the world will change its hue, and you will see that light has never been absent, only that your eyes had not yet opened wide enough to see. The law of mind in action. Since realizing that the mind is the field where seeds are planted, Ethan began to see a deeper law governing everything, the law of mind, also known as the law of reflection. One morning, as he was making coffee, a quote by Emmet Fox echoed in his thoughts. Everything in your life is the image projected from the thoughts you hold constantly. He looked into the mirror and suddenly understood that life itself is one great mirror. It never judges or praises. It simply reflects faithfully what we project into it. He remembered how often he used to wonder why difficulties kept repeating. A good job would fall apart. A peaceful relationship would turn tense. Now he saw clearly, none of it was random. Each time he carried the quiet belief that things would eventually go wrong. That belief worked like a background program, creating results to match. The law of mind is never biased. It only mirrors the exact frequency we send out. When his heart was filled with faith, life responded with open doors. When it was filled with doubt, life reflected walls. Ethan decided to test it. He chose one day to live as if this law were absolute. In the morning, he said to himself, "Today I will plant thoughts of clarity and peace." He went to work with a smile, even when the tasks piled up. At noon, a project hit a snag. A colleague raised his voice. Ethan felt the old impulse to react, but instead he reminded himself, "My mind is the cause, not the victim." He adjusted his thought. Everything will return to order. Moments later, the tension eased, and the team found a solution. He was not surprised. When the cause realigns, the effect must follow. That night he wrote, "The law of mind does not need our belief, it only needs our cooperation." He compared it to gravity. Throw a stone and it falls, sow a thought and it takes form. From then on, he became mindful of his language. He dropped phrases like, "This is too hard," or "It will never work." Each word is a command sent to the universe. He replaced them with, "I am learning and everything is unfolding." Soon the energy around him changed. People began to seek his help in organizing their work. One evening, Grace called saying she could not sleep, worried about her future. Ethan said, "If the mind is the arm that throws a boomerang, what you send out will return. Replace fear with trust in order." She laughed. "That sounds too theoretical." He replied, "It is not theory, it is practice. Choose one simple thought. Everything has its right place. Repeat it whenever fear arises." A week later, she texted him, "Strangely, that sentence really brings peace. And when I feel peaceful, things outside calm down too." Ethan smiled. The law of mind had worked precisely again. He also saw something deeper. This law operates not only in individuals, but in groups. When a team is full of worry, results go wrong. When everyone holds faith, ideas flow. He began to start meetings with 1 minute of silence, not as ritual, but as a pause to bring the mind into order. Within weeks, the team performed better. Someone said, "I don't know why, but just a moment of quiet seems to open creativity." Ethan smiled. "That is because we just tuned the signal." That night he wrote, "The law of mind is a two-way highway. What we send returns, what we hold radiates." He remembered another line from Emmet Fox, "Your world is the film projected from the reel of your mind." He imagined the mind as a theater, every image cast from the reel within. If you want a new scene, do not strike the screen, change the film. From that point, he stopped blaming others or fate. He knew that by changing the source light, the shadow on the wall would change its shape. On difficult days, he still got caught in anger, but instead of guilt, he saw it as feedback. He wrote, The law of mind does not punish, it teaches through reflection. Each time he felt disappointment, he asked, "What in me is sending this signal?" The question opened a door of self-seeing. He discovered hidden beliefs. I must be perfect to be loved. Failure means shame. He began replacing them with new thoughts. I am worthy as I grow. As these core beliefs shifted, the reflections softened. One morning in the park, he saw a child placing a paper boat into a stream. The current carried it away, but it did not sink. It simply floated with the flow. He thought, the mind is the same. When we release the right thought, it naturally drifts toward its result. Our task is not to control the water, but to fold the boat with steady faith. Grace once asked, how can we keep faith when the world is so unstable? Ethan replied, by remembering that this law does not belong to the world, it belongs to consciousness. The storms are only waves. The law is the ocean. Stand in the depth, and the waves cannot touch you. She was silent, then said, that sounds like meditation. Ethan smiled. Meditation is simply staying within the law. He concluded in his notebook, the law of mind is the bridge between thought and experience. We cannot have a chaotic mind and an orderly life. From that day, he treated every thought as real action. He practiced planting gentle thoughts and kind words and found life responding with the same softness and warmth. He understood that success, health, and love are not rewards, but the results of living in harmony with a sacred principle that has always been present. If you are hearing this, pause for a moment. Remember that your mind is creating this very moment. Send out a clear thought now of peace, of abundance, of trust. Let it go like a paper boat upon the stream. And when it returns, you will know that the law of mind never fails. It has only been waiting for you to use it consciously. Overcoming fear and doubt. One early winter morning, Ethan woke with a heaviness in his chest. Nothing was wrong, yet a vague unease was rising inside. He sat by the window, looking at the bare trees, and thought, why do I feel unsafe when nothing is threatening me? Then he realized it was the familiar voice of fear, not because danger was real, but because the mind was telling a story that had not happened. In the past, he believed that to be free from fear, he had to change his circumstances. But the more he ran, the larger fear became. Now he understood fear is only a thought charged with strong energy. It is not real, but when we believe it, it becomes real in our experience. Like a shadow, the more we flee, the more it follows. Only when we turn and look straight at it does it dissolve in the light. He began a new practice. Whenever fear appeared, he did not resist it, but asked, what have you come to teach me? At first, this question felt strange, but soon it revealed its power. Fear was like a child wanting to be heard. Once seen, it softened. Ethan discovered that behind every fear hides an unacknowledged desire. Fear of loss comes from wanting safety, fear of failure from wanting love, fear of rejection from wanting acceptance. When he recognized the true need, fear became a teacher. One day Grace called, her voice trembling. I am afraid I will never find a job. Ethan said, Grace, look closely. What is fear saying to you? She paused, then cried, it says I am useless. Ethan replied gently, no, it only reminds you that you forgot your true worth. After that talk, she said she was not free from fear, but she could breathe again. Ethan knew that was the first step to freedom, not destroying fear, but stepping outside of it. He also discovered that fear has a close cousin, doubt. One shouts, the other whispers. Fear says you will fail. Doubt says, can you really trust this? They are like clouds hiding the sun of awareness. The more you stare at them, the darker it gets. So Ethan practiced speaking with doubt. When the mind said you are not good enough, he smiled, thank you, but I am learning. When it said this will not work, he replied, we will see once we try. He realized doubt does not need to be defeated, only neutralized through small actions. One afternoon he had to present before his superiors. The old fear returned. What if I say something wrong? He paused, breathed deeply, and remembered Emmet Fox's words. Fear is faith working in reverse. He asked himself, what am I believing in right now, failure or order? He chose order. When he began to speak, his hands still trembled, but his voice was steady. After finishing, the room was silent for a moment, then applause came. Ethan did not feel proud, only grateful, for once again light had prevailed. That night he wrote, "You cannot reason fear away, you can only see through it." He pictured fear as a curtain with light behind it. The more he drew it open, the more light filled the space. Each time he did so, he felt himself grow, as if old layers of his mind were shedding. Another night he dreamed he was lost in a forest. The more he searched for the exit, the deeper he went. Then he heard the sound of water and followed it. A small stream led him into a clearing filled with moonlight. When he woke, he understood the dream was a symbol, the water was awareness, and following it dissolves fear. Since then, he used his breath as that stream, returning to it whenever his mind was tangled. Fear lives only in imagined futures. The present is always safe. Grace later asked, "What if fear and doubt keep coming back?" Ethan said, "See them as knocks from lessons not yet complete. Each time you open the door, you grow a little stronger. One day they will not need to come anymore." She laughed. "That sounds like being kind to the enemy." He said, "Yes, because once you treat them kindly, they stop being enemies." One evening during meditation, Ethan saw a simple truth. Fear does not disappear through courage, but through understanding. Courage is walking through darkness while still afraid. Understanding is realizing darkness has no substance of its own. He smiled as stillness spread through him. There was nothing left to conquer, only something to see clearly. From then on, whenever fear knocked, he invited it in, poured it a cup of tea, and watched it fade in the warmth. Fear does not like to be watched, for the light of awareness makes it vanish. As for doubt, he turned it into reflection. If this makes me doubt, what belief do I truly wish to build? One morning he saw a child learning to ride a bicycle. The child fell, cried, then climbed back up. Ethan realized the child was not afraid of falling, only of being left behind. Adults, too, are not afraid of mistakes, but of losing the image they want to keep. Seeing this, the fear in him softened. He no longer needed to be perfect, only honest with his growth. He wrote, "Fear is the guardian at the gate of truth. Once you walk through, the gate disappears." He knew the law of mind would reflect what he held inside, so he chose faith. The next morning he looked into the mirror and said, "I trust the light." 4 simple words, but filled with quiet strength. If you are hearing this, pause and breathe. Remember, fear does not come to harm you, it comes to show where light is needed. When you look at it directly, you stop being led by it and begin leading it outward. Whisper to yourself, "I choose to trust." And if this story touches you, share one thought. What do you fear most? And how ready are you to face it? Thank you for listening and for having the courage to meet your own heart. Healing through thought. One morning, as the first sunlight poured through the window, Ethan sat quietly and looked at his hands, noticing that every cell was alive and breathing and obeying a silent order. He realized that health is not a random reward, but a reflection of a peaceful mind. When the mind is tense, the body tightens. When the mind relaxes, the body opens. He remembered Emmet Fox, "All illness begins in the mind and is healed in the mind." At first the sentence sounded abstract, but now he could feel it with every breath. In the past, Ethan thought healing meant doing something outside, taking medicine, changing routines, exercising. Now he understood those as supports. The core of healing is tuning the stream of thought, like tuning the strings of an instrument. If one string is off, the whole song falls out of rhythm. The mind is the musician. When he let worry flood his thoughts, the music of his body warped. When he shifted toward harmony, the inner rhythm returned. One afternoon he visited his mother. She said her shoulder had been aching for weeks. He did not say much. He simply held her hand and sat in silence. In his mind, he did not think she is ill. He thought there is powerful life within her. He pictured her shoulder loosening, the cells smiling brightly. A week later, she called to say the pain had eased. He did not see it as a miracle, but as the result of harmony in thought. When we behold someone as whole, we help them remember their wholeness. From then on, he practiced a small ritual. Each morning before leaving home, he stood before the mirror, looked into his eyes, and said, I am well because I and life are one. It was not a spell. It was an affirmation of a deeper truth, that life is already complete when we stop resisting. He felt his body lighter and his breath deeper. On tired days, he did not say, I am sick. He said, I am adjusting. And he truly felt a shift. Ethan also saw that not only the body needs healing, but the dry regions of the heart as well. He began writing the memories that still hurt and spoke with them. Once he wrote about an old relationship that haunted him. He closed his eyes, pictured that person, and whispered, we return freedom to each other. Warmth spread from his chest. He understood that forgiveness is the deepest therapy because it cuts the stream of toxic thinking. When he shared this with Grace, she asked, if illness begins in the mind, does that mean the very ill are at fault? Ethan shook his head. No one is to blame. The mind runs on unconscious habits. We only need to notice and redirect. Healing is not forcing ourselves to be cheerful. It is stopping our resistance to the truth of life. Grace grew thoughtful, then said, it feels lighter than I expected. He smiled. Truth is always light. A colleague at work fell into depression. People kept their distance, but Ethan invited him for a walk. They hardly spoke. At the end, the colleague said, I do not know why, but I can breathe easier around you. Ethan knew why. He was not sending pity. He was holding faith in the man's strength. In that non-judgmental presence, he saw clearly that healing is presence without condemnation. He also learned the difference between hope and trust. Hope still carries a trace of doubt. Trust is knowing the order is already working. When he trusted, his mind rested. When the mind rested, the body received the message of safety. Every cell is like a student listening to the teacher called thought. If the teacher speaks confusion, the class becomes chaotic. If the teacher speaks clearly, the class comes into order. He began choosing a lesson for each day: morning peace, noon gratitude, night release. When he caught a cold, he lay down to rest. Instead of complaining, he treated it as an opportunity to observe the body. He placed a hand on his chest and said, thank you for warning me to slow down. In a few days, he recovered. He realized that when we stop resisting, illness becomes a message from life. Each symptom is the voice of a part within us that wants to be heard. He wrote, healing is a reconciliation between the conscious and the subconscious. The conscious sends the right message, the subconscious carries it out. If consciousness says, I am weak, the subconscious obeys. If consciousness says, I am recovering, it adjusts at once. The law of mind was precise again. He noticed how people speak. Those who often say, I am tired, seem more tired. Those who say, I am well, fall ill less often. The path from words to cells is shorter than we think. One evening he looked at the streetlights and thought, the light does not strive to shine, it simply shines. Life within us is the same. It does not try to heal. It balances itself when not covered by the shadows of fear and prejudice. From then on, he stopped trying to fix himself and began to stop interfering. Whenever he felt drained, he paused his work, sat still, and let the mind settle. When the mind returned to quiet, his energy renewed with surprising speed. Grace visited and said her mother could not sleep. Ethan said, do not force her to sleep. Help her to be at ease. She asked how. He said, have her sit and breathe and whisper, I am safe. When the mind believes, the body follows. A week later, Grace called with thanks. Her mother was sleeping well. The story spread, and Ethan grew even more convinced that thought is the most enduring healing current. He concluded there is no strange miracle, only thought returning to right order. Whenever he met someone in pain, he silently sent a single line, may you remember your inherent wholeness. That was his way of praying, not pleading, not interfering, only reminding. Strangely, people often felt lighter. If you are hearing this, practice now. Breathe in deeply, and as you breathe out, say quietly, I am healing. Feel the energy flow through your body. Healing does not begin in the body, it begins in thought. When you trust that a sacred order is always at work within you, the body will listen. And when you treat yourself with that trust, you become a source of healing for the world around you. Affirmation and faith. One fresh March morning, As the wind brushed through the trees outside the window, Ethan opened the small notebook he called the Book of Spoken Seeds. On the first page he had written in blue ink, "Every word is a seed of command sent to the mind." He once doubted affirmations, thinking they were just a way to comfort oneself. But as life went on, he discovered the true power of words when joined with faith. Words are not meant to persuade the universe, they are meant to align us with the order that already exists. In the past, he had spoken unconsciously, "I am so tired, I will never get this done." Each time he did, his energy sank. Now he chose his words carefully. Instead of "I am tired," he said, "I am resting." Instead of "it will not work," he said, "everything is unfolding." Such small shifts felt like turning the compass of his life. He began to understand that affirmation is the tool that shapes a path for energy to flow. When words carry faith, thought follows, and action adjusts naturally. He remembered a line from Emmet Fox: "When you affirm something, you are not trying to make it true, you are acknowledging that it is already true in spirit." That sentence completely changed his approach. He no longer repeated empty phrases, but spoke each word with his heart. Every morning he chose 3 affirmations. One for the body, "I am healthy and at peace." One for work, "Order guides me." And one for the soul, "I am led by inner light." He wrote them slowly, read them slowly, feeling each word like a note of music. At first the mind resisted. A small voice mocked, "This is pointless," saying it changes nothing. But Ethan stayed patient. Whenever doubt appeared, he simply said, "Let us see." After a few weeks, something shifted. The negative voice weakened, replaced by calm. When challenges arose, he no longer said, "I cannot," but "I am learning how." From that point, his actions naturally grew stronger. Once, during a meeting, his project was called unrealistic. Instead of losing confidence, he whispered to himself, "I am guided." That quiet affirmation steadied him and helped him explain his idea in a new way that changed the room's energy. After the meeting, he realized that the words spoken within are far more powerful than the words spoken aloud. They shape reactions and define the energy we radiate. Grace, his close friend, asked, "How do I know which affirmation is right for me?" Ethan replied, "Right is not in the wording, but in the feeling. If saying it makes your heart expand, it is the right one." She tried and later said, "I found that the affirmation 'I am enough' makes me breathe easier." Ethan nodded. That is the signal. When the heart agrees, the mind will follow. He also learned that affirmation should not sound like a command shouted at the mind. If said with tension, the mind resists. The most effective way is to affirm with gentle trust, like speaking with a dear friend. Each night before sleep, he whispered, "Everything is in order." The words soothed him like a lullaby, and he woke with renewed strength. One day he shared with his meditation group, "Affirmation is how we tell the universe who we choose to be." A student asked, "If I affirm something good while my reality is bad, am I lying to myself?" Ethan smiled. "No, you are speaking to the root of truth, not its reflection. Reality is only the old mirror of old beliefs. When you plant a new affirmation, the reflection changes with time." To explain, he told a story about planting. When you plant a seed, you see nothing for days, yet you trust it is growing. If you dig it up every morning to check, it dies. Affirmation works the same way. Speak it, then let faith do its work. The room fell silent. Everyone understood. Ethan recalled how he once affirmed abundance. He used to fear lack, thinking there will never be enough. Now he said, "The supply of the universe is infinite, and I am part of its flow." At first they were only words, but slowly he believed them. New opportunities appeared. A friend offered him a project. An old debt was repaid. He saw clearly that when the mind leaves the frequency of lack, it opens the door to flow. Affirmation without faith is an echo. Faith without affirmation is vague. When the two meet, they form creative power. He could feel the change both mentally and physically. Each time he said, "I am at peace," his heartbeat slowed and his shoulders relaxed. The body listens to the mind. Words are the bridge between consciousness and form. He reminded himself that affirmation is not a charm to escape reality, it is a way to redefine it. When he said, "I am recovering," he was not denying fatigue, but affirming direction. When he said, "I am guided," He was not demanding answers, but opening space for higher wisdom. That openness itself was the miracle. One evening, as moonlight fell upon his desk, he wrote, "Faith is the current, affirmation is the wire. When they connect, the light turns on." He looked out at the glowing street lamps and thought, the lamps do not shine by themselves. They need the current. The mind, too, needs faith for its words to have power. The next morning, he began his day with 3 affirmations and went to work feeling light. Everything unfolded smoothly, as if the world moved in harmony with him. He knew nothing outside had changed, only his inner alignment had. If you are hearing this, softly say 3 times, "I am safe, I am abundant, I am guided." Notice the difference in your breath. If your heart opens even a little, faith has awakened. And if you believe that words can heal, write the words, "I believe." And by doing so, plant your seed of faith in the field of your own mind. Universal law and the silent order. One autumn afternoon, Ethan walked through the park, watching the leaves fall with the wind. They drifted gently, without resistance or hesitation. Each leaf seemed to know when to let go and when to land, as if guided by an invisible hand. Ethan stopped and looked up at the sky, realizing that the entire universe was moving in perfect law, and human life was part of that same order. He whispered, "There is no real chaos, only order not yet seen." He remembered the days when failure made him feel abandoned by fate, but through his inner journey he came to see that nothing happens by accident. Everything follows spiritual laws, quiet forces as precise as gravity. No one sees them, yet they operate every second. Trees grow upward because of the law of life, water flows downward because of the law of gravity, and human experience is shaped by corresponding mental laws: the law of cause and effect, the law of correspondence, the law of growth, and the law of love. One morning, while reading his old notes, Ethan wrote in, bold, "The law of life is never partial. It means everyone reaps what they sow, not as punishment or reward, but as a natural process." He recalled the times he had planted thoughts of fear and harvested anxiety. Now he planted faith and received peace. The law was perfectly fair, but never cruel. Like a mirror that neither praises nor criticizes, only reflects honestly. He began to apply these laws in daily actions. At work, he remembered the law of cause and effect. Every thought and act is a seed, so he sowed sincerity. When facing an angry person, he recalled the law of correspondence. The world reflects your own state. So instead of reacting, he adjusted his tone. When patience was required, he remembered the law of growth. No flower blooms overnight. He smiled because he had stopped rushing. Above all, he practiced the law of love, the law that holds all others, for only through love do the laws become kind. One day, Grace visited, overwhelmed by problems at work. She complained that her boss was unfair and her colleagues jealous. Ethan listened and asked, "If everything follows law, what lesson is this one showing you?" She went quiet, then said softly, "Maybe I have been sowing judgment and now I am reaping it." He nodded. "When you change the seed, the harvest changes. Do not blame the field. Look at your own hands." She laughed through the sting. "It hurts, but it's true." Ethan saw that knowing the laws and living them are not the same. Some days he forgot, reacted impulsively, and had to remind himself, the law does not punish, it teaches. He remembered the time he ruined a project by rushing. Instead of self-blame, he saw it as a lesson from the law of growth. Everything needs time to root. The next project succeeded because he was patient. He began to see the universe as a grand symphony. Every being is a note. When in harmony, the music flows beautifully. When one goes off key, the sound jars. Yet the wonder is that the symphony always self-corrects. Even when we go astray, life brings us back through necessary experiences. Understanding this, Ethan stopped resenting difficulties. He saw that challenges do not punish, they realign. One night in meditation, he recalled the phrase, "As above, so below." He realized the law of correspondence means the outer world mirrors the inner. If peace exists within, we see peace around. If conflict lives inside, we find it everywhere. He began observing each reaction. When someone annoyed him, he asked, "What part of me is this revealing?" Each honest answer brought relief. He also came to grasp the deeper meaning of the law of love. Love is not a romantic emotion, but the force that holds all things in order. Without love, cause and effect become cold. With love, they become gentle teachers. He told Grace, just as gravity keeps the earth in orbit around the sun, love keeps the universe revolving in harmony. When you act from love, every law works with you. One day he walked the old street where painful memories once lingered. In the past, he avoided it, afraid of the feelings it would bring. Now he stopped, smiled, and thanked the past. He realized that forgiveness, too, is part of the law of love. To forgive is to free trapped energy and let the current of order flow again. Not forgiving does not hurt others. It only blocks our own stream. He wrote in his notebook, "The law is not a chain. It is a river guiding us back to the sea." The phrase became his compass. Whenever confused, he no longer asked for miracles, only to see which law was operating. Strangely, clarity always followed. Once he lost a major contract. Instead of complaining, he said, "The law of supply is teaching me to release so I can receive something better." 2 weeks later, a new opportunity arrived, twice as good. He smiled, knowing the law always works when we stop interfering with fear. One afternoon, watching a child fly a kite, he saw how the kite soared only because the string held it. The universal law is that string. It does not limit freedom, it gives freedom direction. Without the string, the kite would vanish. Too tight and it could not rise. The silent order always maintains balance between flight and grounding. He concluded, to live by law is the highest art of freedom. When we understand the laws, we stop resisting, and when we stop resisting, we flow. There is no confusion, no fear, only trust that everything unfolds in its right time and place. If you are hearing this, remember, the universe does not need your control, only your cooperation. Everything you desire already exists within the sacred order of law. Trust that when you live in harmony with it, your life will become calm and clear, like a leaf falling in perfect season, not early, not late, but precisely within the hands of the silent order. Mental self-discipline. Early one Monday morning, Ethan woke earlier than usual. He stepped out to the balcony, breathed deeply, and felt the cool air move through his lungs. In that still moment, he realized that most lasting changes in life do not come from sudden bursts of inspiration, but from small, quiet actions repeated with consistency. He remembered the words of Emmet Fox, "Self-discipline is not restriction, it is the path to freedom." The sentence echoed in his mind like a gentle yet firm reminder. In the past, Ethan believed that understanding principles was enough, but he soon learned that knowledge without practice remains theory. It is like knowing the law of gravity, yet jumping from a cliff. Understanding cannot save you without discipline. Mental self-discipline is the art of mastering the mind, refusing to let it drag you like a wild horse. He began with small steps, waking 10 minutes earlier to meditate, writing a few lines of reflection each night, and taking 3 slow breaths before reacting to emotion. At first it was difficult. His mind behaved like a restless child, sitting still for a moment, then chasing every noise. He wanted to quit, but he remembered that discipline is not forcing but returning. He told himself, "Each time I return, I grow stronger." From then on, he stopped expecting perfection. Each slip became another practice. Like a musician learning scales, his mind began to remember the right notes. One day at work, he had to deal with a stubborn employee. Frustration rose quickly. In the past, he would have reacted sharply, but he recalled the rule. Discipline is the pause between stimulus and response. He stopped, breathed deeply, observed the tension in his chest. Those few seconds allowed reason to return. He spoke with a softer tone, and surprisingly, the other person calmed down too. He understood that self-discipline is not suppression, but choosing the right moment to act. That evening, he wrote, "Discipline is the gatekeeper of peace. Without it, all understanding is swept away by emotion." He realized that every person carries 2 voices within, the quiet one of wisdom and the loud one of impulse. Discipline helps us hear the quiet voice. It is like tuning a radio. When we patiently adjust the dial, static becomes clarity. He also saw that discipline begins with simple things: keeping promises to oneself, finishing small tasks, managing time. He used to postpone everything, waiting for inspiration. Now he understood that inspiration is not the condition for action. Action is the seed of inspiration. When he began, energy came. Each time he overcame laziness, he felt lighter and stronger. Grace, his old friend, asked, "How do you keep discipline without feeling exhausted?" He replied, "Because I do not force, I choose." When you act from faith that something brings you clarity, it becomes joy. She said quietly, "Maybe I need to learn to enjoy discipline." He smiled. "That is the secret. When discipline becomes joy, it is no longer discipline." Another time, Ethan challenged himself not to complain for 3 days. It sounded easy, but within hours he realized how tightly complaint clung to habit. Each time he was about to complain, he replaced it with a word of gratitude. By the third day, his mind felt lighter. He understood that self-discipline is not only controlling actions, but retraining thought. When he disciplined his words, his mind became clearer. During a group talk, he said, "Without discipline, we live like leaves, blown by the wind. With discipline, we become the wind." Someone asked, "Does that mean we fight nature?" He answered, "No, it means we align with our own nature. The wind still blows, but we choose direction." He discovered that self-discipline is the only way to conserve spiritual energy. Each impulsive reaction leaks energy. Each moment of focus stores it. And when energy gathers, deeper wisdom begins to speak. That is why disciplined people often radiate peace, even in silence. One afternoon, meditating in the sound of rain, Ethan realized that discipline is not a goal to reach, but a state of remembering. Remembering that we have a choice. Remembering that we are the masters of our thoughts. Remembering that in every situation we can pause and act from principle instead of emotion. Discipline is that continuous remembering. Grace came again, saying she could not stop scrolling through social media. Ethan said, "Do not fight it, replace it." Each time you want to open the phone, open your gratitude notebook instead. After a week, she told him she felt better. He smiled. Discipline is the art of rearranging energy. You only need to redirect its flow. That night he wrote, "Self-discipline does not imprison us, it opens the door to freedom. The undisciplined person is a slave to emotion. The disciplined person is master of the self." True freedom is not doing whatever you want. It is having the strength not to do what harms you. As the lights dimmed, he saw clearly that every spiritual principle, love, cause and effect, gratitude, needs mental discipline to become living practice. Without it, they remain beautiful ideas. Discipline is the heartbeat of application. If you are hearing this, ask yourself, today is there something you know is right but have not done? Choose one small action and do it, not from pressure, but because you deserve the clarity it brings. And if you feel ready, write or say, "I am ready to change." That is the first act of mental discipline, a promise to yourself that you are strong enough to choose the direction of the wind within your own mind. Love and forgiveness. One clear morning, Ethan walked down the old street where he had once lived through his heaviest days. Sunlight slipped through the trees, and the falling leaves brushed his shoulder. Each step carried him deeper into memory. There he had been betrayed, angry, and closed off. But standing before the cafe of old times, he felt no sting, only a calm expanding through his heart. He realized that was the sign of forgiveness, a healing that requires no declaration, only understanding. In the past, Ethan thought forgiveness was something given to others, an act of kindness toward those who had caused pain. Now he knew forgiveness is freedom for oneself. To withhold it is to hold the fire of resentment and burn alone. Forgiveness is not forgetting, it is remembering without chains. When we see that the other acted from their own fear, anger dissolves like smoke. He recalled a line from a book, "Love is recognizing yourself in another." One afternoon, Grace came to see him, her face heavy. She said, "I cannot forgive my father. He left my mother and me for years. Every time I think of him, I feel rage." Ethan listened quietly and asked, "If resentment were a stone, how long would you like to carry it?" She said, "Nothing." Then tears fell. He continued gently, "Forgiveness does not change the past, it changes your future." The words sank in like a seed, and a month later she called to say she had written a letter to her father. She did not know if he would read it, but she felt light. Ethan understood that love is the foundation of all spiritual law. Without love, every principle is an empty frame. When we love, the law of cause and effect softens, the law of growth becomes natural. Love is not an emotion. It is the organizing energy that brings all things into higher order. It needs no reason and no object. It simply expands. During meditation, he felt energy radiating from his heart, embracing even those he had once conflicted with. In that light, there were no friends or enemies, only souls learning the same lesson. One evening, reading the Bible, he stopped at the line, "Love your enemies." For the first time, he truly understood. Not out of moral duty, but because it is the only way to end the cycle of resentment. Hate breeds hate. Only love ends the circle. He wrote in his notebook, "Forgiveness is the act of the free, not the weak." He remembered a colleague who had spoken badly of him and cost him a promotion. For months, the memory tightened his chest. But one day in meditation, he asked, "If I were in that person's place, might I have done the same in a moment of weakness?" The question dissolved his anger. The next day, he met that colleague, smiled, and shook hands. No apology, no explanation. Love had done what logic could not. He realized that love and forgiveness cannot be separated. Forgiveness is the highest form of love, and love is forgiveness alive. Each time we love, we forgive life for being imperfect. Each time we forgive, we love the wounded part within ourselves. With this understanding, Ethan stopped trying to love by effort and began opening to life itself. Love, he saw, is not an effort, but a return. Once, speaking to his students, he said, "When we hold resentment, we imprison the soul. When we forgive, we set it free." But only one key can unlock that chain, and that key is love. A student asked, "What if they do not deserve it?" Ethan smiled. "Love is not a reward for others. It is medicine for you. Forgiveness does not say they are right. It says you have chosen peace." The room fell silent, and only the wind moved through the window. From then on, Ethan turned love and forgiveness into daily practice. Each night before sleep, he imagined a light surrounding himself and those who had hurt him. He whispered, "We are all learning to love." Gradually, the faces that once stirred anger appeared with gentleness. He understood that when the heart opens, every image is washed clean. One morning, walking by the river, he watched the water flow, carrying leaves and debris without keeping any of it. He smiled, realizing that this was the lesson of love. Water does not judge, it flows. Love is the same. When we let it move through the heart, all wounds are carried away. Forgiveness needs no reasoning, because love does not argue. It only expands. He wrote in his notebook, "Love is the supreme law. Forgiveness is how that law expresses itself in time." He knew that only when the heart softens does the mind truly see. The rigid are not strong. Those who love cannot be broken. That evening, Grace sent him a message. "I called my father. He cried. I cried. Thank you for helping me see differently." Ethan smiled, did not reply at once, and simply wrote another line in his notebook. "When one person forgives, the world loses a layer of pain." If you are hearing this, pause for a moment, close your eyes, and remember someone who once hurt you. No need to force anything, just whisper, "I choose peace." You may not forgive yet, but those words open the first crack of light. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination, and love itself will walk with you along the way. If you feel a small lightness in your heart as you listen, leave a simple message or say, "I am ready to love," so that we know you are still listening with an open heart. Wealth and the flow of abundance. One early summer morning, Ethan sat on his porch watching sunlight fall over the garden. On a small leaf, a single drop of dew reflected the whole sky. He smiled and thought, "This is the image of abundance, small yet holding infinity." In the past, he had linked wealth with money. He worked obsessively, saved anxiously, and feared losing what he had. But the tighter he held on, the poorer he felt. Now he understood that true wealth does not begin in the wallet, but in the state of mind. The year he lost his job, he thought his life was collapsing. Yet in that space of emptiness, he discovered another law at work. When one door closes, it signals a new flow. He began to trust the circulation of life. When water is blocked, it stagnates. When released, it becomes a river. He wrote in his notebook, "Wealth is the circulation of energy, not accumulation." That sentence became his compass in every choice. He recalled Emmet Fox's words, "No one is truly poor unless they believe supply is limited." The thought stayed with him for days. He realized that poverty and wealth are states of consciousness. A poor mind always sees lack. A rich mind always sees opportunity. He began to observe his own habits, how he spoke, thought, and felt about money. He noticed that each time he said everything is so expensive, he was strengthening a belief in scarcity. He changed it to everything has value, and I am learning to use it wisely. Within weeks, he felt lighter, and money began to flow more easily. One afternoon, Grace asked, "If someone is truly poor, can positive thinking help?" Ethan answered, "Positive thought is not magic. It is a beginning. Like a farmer who must first believe the soil can bloom before planting. Without belief, they never dig the ground. Thought is the first field of every kind of wealth." She nodded thoughtfully. He started practicing what he called the flow mindset. Each time he received money, even a small amount, he silently gave thanks and set aside a portion to give, not out of charity, but understanding that giving keeps the current open. One day he bought lunch for an old man on the street. That afternoon he unexpectedly received payment from a project he thought was lost. He smiled, seeing it not as coincidence but precision. The universe always balances the equation when we trust and give. It expands the circle. He learned another lesson. Gratitude is the key to wealth. Each night he wrote 3 things he was grateful for. At first they were simple: food to eat, a place to live, loved ones near. Gradually the list grew longer: grateful for a worry-free day, grateful for learning something new. He noticed that when the mind focuses on sufficiency, it cannot feel lack at the same time. The sense of abundance began to spill into health, relationships, and work. One day Ethan was invited to speak about spiritual prosperity. He said, "When I began to love the work I do, money came as a result, not as a goal." Someone asked, "But what if you love your work and money still doesn't come?" He smiled. "When you truly love, you will find ways to serve, and when you serve, value naturally creates return. Money is a reflection of value given, not a random reward." The room fell quiet, then filled with applause. Ethan understood that true wealth excludes no one. It is like air. Whoever opens their heart to receive can breathe it in. He had seen people with plenty of money but no peace, and others with little who radiated joy, because they lived in gratitude and trust. He wrote, "Wealth does not lie in what we own, but in our ability to see that we already have enough." One afternoon, while walking, he saw a child sharing a cookie with a friend. They both laughed freely. He realized that this is the essence of prosperity: sharing without fear of loss, knowing that joy doubles when spread. He whispered, "The child understands what adults forget. Wealth comes from an open heart." From then on, he made a new rule. Whenever he felt lack, he would give something. When he felt fear, he would remember times he was helped. When he felt tired, he would return to his breath and say, "I am in the flow." That flow, he understood, is the law of life, always moving, always enough. Scarcity is only an illusion created by disconnection. Grace visited again, saying she had just received a raise and asked how to invest. Ethan said, "The first investment is in consciousness. Learn to see money as a friend, not an enemy. When you appreciate it, it stays. When you fear it, it hides." She laughed. "You sound like a sage." He replied, "No, just someone who used to be afraid and learned to trust." That night he wrote, "Wealth is the calm assurance that life always supports you." He remembered moments when he thought there was no way forward, and help appeared from nowhere. He realized that when we stop worrying, we become a clear channel through which supply flows. He no longer prayed, "Please give me enough." He simply said, "Thank you for the abundance that already is." If you are hearing this, pause, Take a deep breath and whisper, I am living in abundance. Feel your breath as the rhythm of prosperity, flowing in and out, never ending. Remember, you do not need to hold on to be rich. You only need to trust that the current is always open. And if you believe you are worthy of prosperity, say softly or write down, I choose abundance, because in that moment the seed of wealth has already begun to sprout in your mind. Mastering the mind, the final journey of awakening. One quiet morning, Ethan sat meditating by the window. The first rays of sunlight touched his face, and every sound seemed to fade until only the rhythm of his breath remained. In that stillness, he realized what he had been seeking for years. Not a grand secret out there, but the silent power within his own mind. Every path he had walked before, understanding the laws, practicing discipline, learning love and faith, had only been preparation for this moment, the mastery of his own thought. In the past, Ethan lived as a victim of emotion. One harsh word could ruin his day. One small problem could keep him awake at night. He once believed the mind could not be controlled, that thoughts simply came and went at will. But the deeper he studied, the clearer he saw. We cannot stop birds from flying over our heads, but we can stop them from building nests. Mastery of the mind is not forcing yourself not to think. It is choosing which thoughts are allowed to stay. One afternoon he sat in a crowded cafe. Around him was noise and motion, yet inside there was a quiet clarity. He watched every sound, every face, without being pulled in. For the first time, he felt the distance between the self and the thought. He realized he was not the mind, but the observer of the mind. That recognition freed him from an invisible chain. Once you see this truth, fear loses its grip, doubt dissolves, because they are only clouds drifting across the sky of awareness. He wrote in his notebook, enlightenment is not learning something new, but pausing to see what already is. Each time he sat still, he watched the flow of thoughts like waves on the shore. Some waves were joy, some sorrow, but he no longer swam after them. He let them rise and fall until the sea became calm. The more he released, the clearer the water became. The clearer it became, the brighter the light of awareness shone. Grace asked him, does mastering the mind mean having no emotion? He smiled, no. It means emotions still come, but we are no longer their slaves. We feel them, then let them go. He added, I used to react fast. Now I choose to respond slowly. She asked, how do you know the difference between reaction and response? He said, reaction comes from fear. Response comes from light. One day at work, a driver shouted at him for driving too slow. Instead of getting angry, Ethan looked at him and saw the tiredness in his eyes. He simply said, drive safe. The driver fell silent, then smiled. Ethan understood, when you master your mind, the world softens too. Not because it changes, but because you see with different eyes. Step by step, he trained his mind like a horse trainer. Each morning, he set a clear intention. Today, I choose peace over being right. Each night, he reviewed moments when his mind wandered, not to judge, but to learn. He discovered a law. The mind grows only where attention is fed. When we withdraw attention from fear and direct it toward trust, fear fades away. He recalled Emmet Fox's words, the mind is the pen that writes destiny. Every thought is an ink stroke on the page of life. When we write unconsciously, the page fills with stains. When we write with awareness, every word shines. He realized that every miracle and every change begins inside. No event, no savior, only a shift in thought, and the whole world transforms. One evening he watched the stars and saw that the human mind and the universe follow the same order. Both expand when unbound. When we release attachment to thought, we touch a deeper level of consciousness where division disappears. There is no self and other, only one living current, vast and silent. He called it the Sea of Light. Each time he touched that sea, he felt cleansed by pure truth, needing no belief, no affirmation, only knowing. Grace asked, will the mind ever be completely still? He said, yes, but not by force. When you no longer try to make it still, it becomes still. Like a lake, that smooths only when you stop stirring it. He smiled. Stillness is not a result, it is the nature itself. From then on, he lived slower, spoke less, but every word carried depth. He no longer tried to convince anyone, he simply lived as example. When people asked the secret of peace, he said, "Learn to observe your mind and stop believing everything it says." They were surprised, yet many returned later to thank him because life had become lighter. One day he wrote the final line in his notebook: "When the mind serves the soul, we are free. When the soul serves the mind, we are lost." In that moment, he felt the journey complete, not as an ending, but as a natural way of being. All theories melted into experience, all seeking dissolved into knowing. He sat quietly watching the sunset. The last light painted gold across the horizon. He felt no need for anything more, no need to prove, no need to affirm. Mind and heart had merged, silent and clear. If you are hearing this, pause for a moment. Take a deep breath. Feel the stillness between the inhale and the exhale. That is your pure mind. In that instant, there is no past, no future, only you and life itself. Ask yourself, what am I choosing to think right now? In that answer, you are writing the next chapter of your life, and if you have walked this far with the story, leave a simple note. I am awakening, so I will know that in this invisible current, another soul has begun the journey of mastering the mind and is quietly shining from within.